So I've been doing a little bit of work with the dynamic cache module recently on a site that I'm working on, and one of the things that I experienced was that I was working a lot of menu shapes which were being cached, and I couldn't edit my templates because the items were cached. So we talked about adding a new setting so that we could either turn the cache on or turn the cache off, or so that you could uncache your objects. So in the configuration menu under settings, we've added it here. As part of the standard site settings. So you have the normal site settings, the resource settings for all your scripts, and then a cache setting. And the settings here are very similar to the resource settings. The default is that the cache will be enabled in production or disabled otherwise. Then you can just turn it on to enabled all the time. Or you can specifically disable it. Or, and this one's actually really been quite useful because I've been doing a lot of work with the caching, and it's been really helpful to see what's in the cache and what cache blocks I'm using are working. So you can turn it on and have a cache debug mode. Now, what that will give you is when you look at your blog, and then you go and look at the source of it. Everywhere there's a cache block, you'll get a little bit of information telling you about the cache block, which cache ID it's using, the dependencies that it's using, how long it's cached for, any of the variations that are present, and then it will show you all of the stuff that's in the cache and the end of the block. So if you're starting to work with a lot of dynamic cache options, that can be just really useful to see what's going on and whether your cache blocks are working correctly and whether they're adding the correct dependencies later on. So nice simple setting. If we turn it back off again. Actually, I'll disable it. I'll turn on the mini profiler for a second, because this is how I've been kind of evaluating whether it's working for me. I don't know if everybody knows the mini profiler feature particularly, but you get a profile of what happens during your page loads. And what's useful here is we can see the SQL calls that are being made. So here we've got a list call, and here let's look down a little bit further, there's going to be a menu. There you go, there's a menu call, which was the one that we cached. So as we refresh that page with the cache disabled, we're going to see that the menu is constantly being retrieved from the database. But if we go back into here and turn the cache on specifically and reload this page, I'm reloading it a couple of times because every time you change your site settings, you reset the site. What we're going to see is that the menu item is no longer being retrieved from the database in order to render this page.
You made a mistake. Not the menu item, the menu.
Oh, the menu, the main menu, in fact.
Very important, because in Orchard 1, it will load the menu items one by one. They are different content items. Here, the menu is a content item, and the menu items are contained by this main menu item. So it's a single query.
So it's a single query, but it's also a single query that's now not happening, which is good. and if I was to go back in and edit the menu, then it would clear the cache automatically, because the cache has a dependency on this alias, and then it would refresh it from the database and keep it in the cache for 5 minutes.
What's the scope of the setting? Because there are lots of caches. There is the dynamic cache module, which will work with shapes, but it also uses services that are available as liquid tags and tag helpers to cache custom sections, which are part of Core and not the ASP.NET stack. So I assume these settings apply to the cache services in general and not just the shape cache.
Yeah, correct. I'm just looking to see if I can. So this is the liquid cache statement, which looks at the cache options. There's also the this one here is probably the that pops the cache debug mode in, and it's also there on the dynamic tag helper, the dynamic cache tag helper, the Razor one, and I think here, just in the service itself for the dynamic cache, I'm able to actually disable it, so just return null when it tries to get a cached value. So it impacts on as far as I know, all of the cache places that we're using. If that makes sense.
Yes, I wonder if people will think that it also works for the ASP.NET cache, which it doesn't.
No, and there's an issue open about that. I'll talk about it at triage next time we get to it, because that's working. It's fighting with the current tag helper. Because they're both named the same, so they both get triggered. So one of the
what is named the same? What and what?
So the dynamic cache tag helper, if you're working with it in Razor, it's called cache, and so is the other one that you wrote for the ASP.NET.
That's weird.
So what happens is when you go kind of down here in your scope, and you process the content, when it actually calls and process content, if it didn't find it in the cache, get child content, that calls down into the MVC tag helper. It renders the cache, puts it in its own memory cache, and then returns it up here. So it actually stays in cache, so it's actually cached twice.
Yeah, because there is a name conflict.
Because there is a name conflict.
That's weird. Why did we use this name? That's weird. We have to look at the history, because when I wrote this tag helper, I must have known there was another cache. Oh, I know. There is a conflict only if you include the tag helpers, the two assemblies for the tag helpers. I see. Well,
yeah, so the trick is to actually remove the, so if we go to somewhere in one of the themes.
In the view component, in the view imports, probably. So maybe
if we go here, so by default we add these. So the fix is to go remove tag helper.
I didn't even know you could do that.
Oh, neither did I. Tag helpers dot cache or something along those lines.
Okay, the issue is that we should not have a conflict in the name. We should not have named that cache. Then we should have called it something else.
Yeah, I would call it dynamic dash cache, because it's from the dynamic cache module. But you know, that would clear up any ambiguity.
Yeah, that's bad.
And it's one of those things that you don't know until you get it in the debugger and you actually look at it and you realize that both memory caches are being filled.
Okay.
But anyway, back to the settings, which are great. I think they cover everything. And it should be really useful if you're starting to use cache blocks, which I've been doing a lot this last week, and they're really impressive.
Sorry, I didn't get what you said. What?
Sorry,
you work on?
I've just been doing a lot of work this last week on a site I'm building with cache blocks.
Cache blocks, okay.
Yeah, cache blocks. And they are very good.
The dynamic cache blocks or the ASP.NET cache blocks?
The dynamic cache blocks.
Yeah, you bet they are good.
They're great.
I think that's a great way to use the decouple mode and use the cache blocks, cache tag helpers, liquid cache, just to have fast sites. And I would love to see more usage of that, like decouple site and cache blocks. And because in the cache blocks you can put your local queries, they won't be run because they're cached. That's super nice way to do that.
Yeah, so that's actually exactly what I've been doing this past week is making queries, making SQL queries, putting them in cache blocks, adding the dependencies the first time the query runs, and then testing whether or not I can update content and have the cache clear automatically. And I'm really impressed. It's great.
When you say SQL queries, you don't mean actual SQL queries directly. You mean like content queries or predefined SQL queries?
Yeah, predefined SQL queries. So these kind of SQL queries.
Okay. Named SQL queries. Okay. And even though you could have inline SQL queries inside your result view, or call generic content queries based on whatever tags, content types, using the helpers. Okay, but here you administrate your SQL queries in this feature in the admin. Okay.
Yeah, to be honest, I have done a bit of both direct session queries, but for me the SQL queries are proving more powerful because I can just be a little bit more specific about what I need, and cross-reference against taxonomies a little better. Okay. The site will be done in a couple of months, so hopefully I can give another bit of how we are using it.
Must be a big site, couple of months.
Oh, it's not a little one. Keeps me busy.
Good for you. Okay, thank you. Very nice. So we did that model for resources like scripts, CSS, minified resources. Do we want minified versions of the scripts on production and development? Always. We did that for caching now. Where could it be applied? And I have the third question after that. Where could we apply that model? I think that's it. But yeah, that's a good pattern to reuse, to be able to choose when we want to enable a behavior based on its production, its development, always, never, more than just enabling the feature. Okay? Because sometimes just enabling the feature is not what you want in terms of permissions or atomicity. I have another question, which is, how do you purge the cache? You have to disable it? Can't you just say purge, keep it, but purge now?
Well, I actually put a little hint in here when I first wrote this PR and said, if you want to purge your case, just click save, because it reloads the tenant every time. And the cache services are scoped inside the tenant.
That's wrong. That's wrong because if you use the Redis cache implementation, it won't restart. It won't clear that.
And that's why I removed the hint.
Okay, so so we can't right now. We can't say purge the cache, but yeah, there is no purge the cache.
There is no purge the cache. But
I'm not even sure it will be doable because it will mean that the services, the dynamic cache service needs to record every entry. It might not be available. So the services in ASP.NET Core or the interfaces we provide don't support that. It's based on each implementation, and that there is no common interface for that. Meaning in Redis, if you used a name database in Redis, you could do that, but the interface doesn't expose the fact that you have a name database because it's very specific. So I'm not sure you can actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would have to be something that was just supported by the Redis option, so we could have an interface.
The only way would be to have a prefix on the keys that can be changed dynamically, like the same way you restarted the tenant. Maybe the tenant could have a run ID, a version, or run version, a GUID when it started, and we could use that as a prefix so that if you restart the tenant, it will use completely new keys. And this is, by the way, how we handle in dynamic cache. We handle the entries. They are all based on names. So if you don't use the same name all the time, then it will expire eventually.
Yeah, so that could work. Prefixing based on the.
Yeah, but I don't think we should do that. I think we should keep it this way. And if you use Redis, then go flush your Redis cache.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much.